A massive Avengers Doomsday plot leak just surfaced on 4chan, and honestly, some of this stuff is wild enough that it might actually be real. Now look, I know what you're thinking. 4chan leaks are basically the comic book equivalent of throwing darts blindfolded and hoping something sticks. But here's the thing. Back during Infinity War and Endgame, some of those anonymous leaks were completely accurate, down to specific plot details that nobody could have guessed. So yeah, take this with a massive grain of salt, but also keep in mind that sometimes the craziest sounding stuff turns out to be exactly what Marvel had planned all along. This leak is incredibly detailed, covers the entire first act of Doomsday, and includes some genuinely shocking revelations about Doctor Doom's origin and why Steve Rogers might be the villain of this whole story. According to this leak, the movie opens immediately after the Fantastic Four post-credits scene. Sue Storm finds a hooded figure lurking near Franklin, naturally attacks because that's what any protective mother would do, but it turns out to be Doctor Doom, proving he means no harm. Now here's where it gets absolutely insane. Doom explains he's from Earth 616B, which is a branch timeline that was created when Steve Rogers went back in time to be with Peggy Carter. In this alternate reality, Tony Stark grows up completely differently and becomes Victor Von Doom instead. He lives a life that parallels Tony's journey, survives the Thanos snap, but gets horribly disfigured in the process and has to be kept alive by his suit. Then a space-time collapse destroys everything, killing his wife and child. Doom blames Steve's time meddling for triggering the multiversal incursions that are now threatening to destroy every reality in existence. And honestly, that's a genuinely brilliant way to tie Robert Downey Jr. into the Doctor Doom role while making it personal between him and Steve Rogers. The emotional weight of Tony Stark becoming a villain because of something Captain America did is exactly the kind of gut punch Marvel loves. The leak goes on to explain that the film follows four main groups throughout the story. You've got the original Avengers, led by Steve Rogers, Sam Wilson's new Avengers team, the Fantastic Four obviously, and then the Wakandan Talocan Alliance. Apparently, the young Avengers are present, but they're being saved for Secret Wars, which makes total sense from a storytelling perspective. After the Thunderbolts post-credits scene, an incursion begins, and Doom arrives on Earth 616 with the Fantastic Four. Wakanda joins forces with them, and together they try to stop the collision using some kind of teleportation technology that was originally designed to fight Galactus. They successfully delay the incursion twice, but the second attempt completely drains Earth's energy and triggers an even worse third incursion. This forces them to investigate a third Earth where they discover a peaceful X-Men universe. Now this is where Franklin's powers come into play. Defense systems detect him as an Omega-level threat, and Sentinels immediately attack. Franklin instinctively uses his reality warping abilities to defend himself, which absolutely impresses Doom. The team reaches the X-Mansion and tensions are running high, but Monica Rambeau steps in and calms everything down. But then Doom secretly bonds with Franklin and escapes with him aboard the Fantastic Four ship, leaving the heroes scrambling to figure out how to stop him and save Franklin. All of that reportedly happens in just the first hour. Now here's where the leak gets really interesting with all the additional details. There's apparently a character named Boris from Latveria who has an important role, though it's not clear if that's an alias or an actual new character. When the Fantastic Four ship first arrives on Earth 616, both Sam's Avengers and Steve's team rush toward it, but Sam's group gets there first along with Thor. And get this, Thor was apparently sent on his journey by Love, his adopted daughter, as one of the first to interact with the Fantastic Four. It's basically a parallel to that iconic moment in Infinity War when Thor meets the Guardians and asks who the hell they are. I actually love that callback because it shows Marvel's paying attention to those character dynamics. But what really caught my attention is the detail about Doom's followers. Apparently, he has about 4 followers total, including 3 witches who can shapeshift. One wears a purple cloak with a gold mask, another has an orange cloak with a gold mask, and the third wears the classic green cloak. The leak speculates these could be Clea and Sylvie working alongside Doom. And here's the kicker. Hayley Atwell was reportedly seen in a Doom costume on set, though it's unclear if that was just a witch shapeshifting into her or something else entirely. If Clea is actually one of these followers, that would mean Doctor Strange has already aligned himself with Doom before Doomsday even begins, which honestly makes perfect sense given where we left Strange at the end of Multiverse of Madness. Think about it for a second. Strange was corrupted by the Darkhold, then Clea showed up and told him about an incursion he caused, and they both disappeared into the Dark Dimension. If Clea was already working with Doom, then Strange and Doom's alliance could have been forged off-screen during all that time we haven't seen Strange. That would explain where he's been and why he ends up being Doom's sheriff in Secret Wars, just like in the comics. And while everyone's been assuming that Tony's face is what's going to persuade the Avengers to trust Doom, this leak suggests Steve doesn't actually trust him at all from the start. So maybe it's Doctor Strange who brings everyone together instead. Wong is reportedly on Sam's Avengers team, so it wouldn't be hard for Strange to show back up after being gone and convince Wong to join their cause. especially if they're the only ones who truly understand what's happening with the incursions. I'm genuinely buying into this theory because it ties together so many loose threads Marvel's been dangling. The other fascinating details include Loki apparently not forming any kind of multiversal Avengers team, which goes against a lot of fan theories. There's going to be a conversation between Franklin and Doom, though I'm not sure how that works since Franklin can't talk yet unless they age him up significantly. Doom has multiple followers who aren't just random henchmen, they're witches with real power. The X-Men are likely from the same universe as Gambit, but not necessarily the Fox timeline from Deadpool and Wolverine, which would explain why those characters aren't showing up in these scenes. Some of the smaller details are equally intriguing. Steve Rogers gets Mjolnir back from Thor, but doesn't have his shield. Sentry wears the same suit from Thunderbolts. There are flashbacks showing Doom's origin story. We're getting reunions between Steve and Bucky, Steve and Sam, Steve and Scott Lang. The X-Mansion gets destroyed, which we already saw in the trailer. Reed and Doom's rivalry begins in this film. Steve's son is apparently named James, and he's aged up significantly. Doom wears his mask for about 90% of the movie, which honestly is the right call because you don't cast Robert Downey Jr. and then hide his face the entire time. But you also can't just have him look exactly like Tony without any explanation. The leak claims Doom isn't actually a Tony variant. He just happens to have Tony's face, which is a distinction that matters for the story. Walker gets his damaged shield fixed by the Thing. Red Guardian gets his own shield, similar to the one from Black Widow. There are scenes between Sentry and Gambit, Sue and Namor. The Young Avengers, specifically Kate Bishop, Kamala Khan, and Cassie Lang, have small roles and share a scene in an apartment. Gambit wears an all-black suit at some point in the Baxter building. Sue also has an all-black suit that she wears around Shuri, though it's probably not her malice persona. Doom has 3 different suits throughout the movie, showing his evolution as a character. Now, between this main plot leak and all these additional details, there's some genuinely interesting stuff that lines up with what we already know. Daniel RPK mentioned Doom having female sidekicks with different colored cloaks, and he thought they were Doom variants. But this leak clarifies they're actually separate characters, likely these shape-shifting witches. That makes way more sense, because Marvel always includes lesser villains that heroes can defeat or interact with before the final battle. These 3 witches could serve that exact purpose. And honestly, the idea that Doom isn't working completely alone feels right. He's a genius, sure, but he's also strategic enough to surround himself with powerful allies who can do his bidding. The whole concept of Steve Rogers being the root cause of all the incursions because he went back to be with Peggy is absolutely devastating from a storytelling perspective. Steve made that choice thinking it was his happy ending, his reward for all the sacrifices he made. But if that one selfish decision is what caused the multiverse to start collapsing, that's tragic on a level Marvel hasn't touched since Tony's sacrifice in Endgame. And it creates this perfect conflict where Steve has to face the consequences of his actions, while Doom, who is essentially a twisted version of Tony, wants to make him pay for destroying everything. But here's where I have to pump the brakes a bit. As interesting as all of this is, we need to be skeptical. At this point, anyone could go to ChatGPT, tell it to compile every Doomsday rumor and leak that's been circulating, and ask it to write a plot summary. People were doing this even before AI became mainstream, just manually collecting rumors and presenting them as inside information. What I find most telling is that this leak, like almost every other leak we've seen, only covers the first act or maybe the first half of the movie. Nobody has definitively explained how Doomsday actually ends. There was one leak from an unproven source claiming some heroes might escape to the quantum realm when the multiverse collapses, using rafts built by the TVA or PIM technology, and that's where the Young Avengers hide out before attacking Battleworld. But I absolutely hated that idea the first time I heard it, because it's just recycling the quantum realm plot device from Endgame. Ant-Man was trapped there and came out with the time heist solution. Now it would be his daughter trapped there, coming out with a plan to save everyone from Battleworld? That's way too similar, and I don't think Marvel would go back to that well. Until we start getting concrete information about how Doomsday actually ends and transitions into Secret Wars, I'm not fully buying any of these plot leaks. They're fun to discuss, and some details might be accurate, but without the ending, we're only seeing part of the picture. What I will say is this: if even half of what's in this leak turns out to be true, Doomsday is going to be an absolute emotional roller coaster that fundamentally changes how we view the entire MCU timeline and Steve Rogers' legacy.